Aliens had broken every species they captured, then they bought 4 humans. I woke up in a cell made of light. Not bars, not metal. Just walls of soft blue light that hummed when I got too close. My head hurt. My mouth tasted like metal. I did not remember how I got there, only flashes. A cargo ship, a bright flash, voices speaking in clicks and whistles. I sat up slowly and looked around. 3 other people were in the cell with me. A woman in a torn flight jacket, maybe 40 years old, with short gray hair and sharp eyes. A teenage boy, thin and scared, hugging his knees. And an old man with a calm face, sitting cross-legged like none of this bothered him at all. "You're awake," the woman said. Her voice was steady. "Good. Welcome to the club." "Where are we?" I asked. "Somebody's cargo hold, I think," she said. "We got picked up by bounty hunters 2 days ago, then sold. Twice, maybe 3 times. I stopped counting." The old man opened one eye. "We are property now," he said simply. "Best to understand that early." I did not like how calm he sounded, but I would learn, later, that his calm was not surrender. It was something else entirely. The teenager, whose name was Milo, would not stop shaking. The woman, who told us to call her Reyes, sat next to him and put a hand on his shoulder. She did not say it would be okay. She just stayed there, solid and present, until his shaking slowed down. I introduced myself. My name does not matter much to this story, so I will just say I was the youngest adult in the group, and I had been a teacher back home. Not a soldier, not a scientist, just a person who used to explain history to teenagers in a classroom. It seemed like a strange thing to be. Now, chained in an alien cargo hold light years from Earth. The old man's name was Deverick. He said he used to work on fishing boats. He did not talk much, but when he did, everyone listened. Through the glowing wall, we could see other cells, other creatures. Some had scales, some had too many limbs, some had no eyes at all. All of them sat still. All of them stared at nothing. None of them spoke, and none of them moved unless they were told to. "What happened to them?" Milo whispered. Reyes did not answer right away. "I think," she finally said, "we're looking at what happens to people who give up." I did not sleep that night, if it was night. There was no way to tell. I just watched the silent creatures across from us and wondered how long they had been like that, and whether we would end up the same way. 3 days later, or what felt like 3 days, we were moved. Guards with long limbs and no faces I could read walked us down a corridor. The floor was cold under my bare feet. We passed a room where the light was different, dimmer, almost purple. Through a window I saw a creature strapped into a chair, wires attached to its head, eyes wide and unfocused. It did not struggle. It did not make a sound. "That's where we're going," Deverick said quietly, not a question. The guards brought us into an auction chamber. It was large and round, with rows of seats rising up around a platform in the center. Creatures of every shape filled those seats, murmuring in dozens of languages. Screens above the platform showed numbers, prices, information about the goods being sold. We were the goods. They pushed us up onto the platform one at a time. I remember the lights were too bright, and the murmuring got louder as it got to us, because apparently humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. A voice announced something in a language I did not understand, followed by a translation that came through a small device clipped to my ear. Species, human. Homeworld, unconfirmed location, Sol system. Batch of 4, untested for the Valkyrie conditioning program. A murmur went through the crowd at the word Valkyrie. Even some of the guards shifted where they stood. Then a single figure stood up from a high seat near the back. It was tall, thin, with smooth gray skin and no visible mouth. Just a flat panel where a face should be that flickered faintly as it spoke through a translator. "I will take all 4, it said. "Standard rate. I do not need to test them. They will be tested properly, and they will be broken properly, like all the others." The crowd murmured with what I now understood was respect, maybe even a little fear. I would learn later that this being was called a conditioner, a specialist of the Valkyrie Concordat, an organization that had been capturing and reshaping species across the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. Their record was perfect. Every species they had ever taken, no matter how strong, no matter how proud, no matter how intelligent, had eventually been broken down into calm, obedient labor. It usually took a few weeks, sometimes only days. The conditioner's name, translated roughly, was Thren. As guards led us off the platform toward a transport ship, Thren walked close to look at us. Its flat face panel tilted slightly, studying each of us in turn. "Interesting," it said, in a voice with no warmth in it at all. You do not look away from me. The others always look away. Reyes looked directly at it. Get used to it, she said. Thren made a small sound, almost like a laugh, though I could not tell if it understood humor. We shall see, it said, and turned to lead us onto its ship. The Valkyrie ship was clean, quiet, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. They separated us into individual rooms with the same soft blue light as before. My room had nothing in it except a thin mat on the floor and a small drain in the corner. The wall facing the corridor was transparent, so guards could watch me at all times. This was the beginning of what Thren called conditioning. For the first few days, they simply left me alone with nothing to do and no one to talk to. No light changes to mark day or night. No sound except a faint hum. Food arrived through a slot in the wall at random times, so I could never predict when the next meal would come. I later learned this was intentional. Removing patterns, removing control, removing the sense of time. These were the first steps in their process. It was meant to make a mind feel lost, and a lost mind was easier to reshape. I will admit, the first 2 days were hard. I paced, I talked to myself, I cried a little, and I am not ashamed to say so. But on the third day, I remembered something my grandmother used to do. She was a storyteller. When my brother and I were small and scared during storms, she would sit with us and tell long, rambling stories about her childhood, or made-up adventures, anything to fill the silence with something warm. So I started telling myself stories. Out loud at first because the sound of my own voice helped. I told myself the plot of every book I had ever read. I recited historical events from my classroom lessons, the ones I used to teach students. I made up new stories about my life after all of this, assuming there would be an after. It did not fix everything, but it gave my mind something to hold on to besides fear. Later, I found out I was not the only one doing something like this. On the 5th day, guards allowed us 30 minutes together in a shared space, supposedly to monitor how we behaved with each other. This was another part of their process. They wanted to see if we would turn against one another under stress, the way many species did. Instead, the 4 of us sat close together and immediately started talking, fast and quiet, trying to share everything before the time ran out. I've been counting the guard shifts, Reyes said. There's a pattern in when they check the rooms. It's not perfectly even, but it's close. I found a scratch on the wall of my room, Deverick added. Small marks, like someone before me was counting days, maybe more than one someone. Milo, who I worried about the most, surprised me. I've been remembering my whole life, he said, every birthday party, every stupid argument with my sister. I didn't know I could remember so much detail if I tried hard enough. I told them about my stories. Reyes nodded slowly. We're all doing the same thing, just different versions of it, she said. We're refusing to let them empty us out. A guard interrupted us then, cutting the visit short. But something had shifted. We were no longer 4 strangers thrown together by chance. We were a team, even if we did not have a plan yet. Weeks passed. I stopped trying to count them exactly, but I know it was longer than any species had ever taken to break, because Thren began visiting more often, and its calm clinical tone started to change. Your vital signs suggest stress, Thren said to me during one visit, standing outside my transparent wall. Yet your behavior does not match the expected decline. Explain this. I looked at it for a long moment. We tell each other stories, I said. About home, about nothing. It doesn't matter what the story is. It matters that we're still talking. Thren's face panel flickered. A sign I had learned meant it was processing something it did not fully understand. Storytelling has no functional value to survival, it said. You'd be surprised, I told it. It left without another word. I later learned, through pieces Reyes gathered from careless comments by lower-ranking guards, that Thren had never failed to break a captive group within 3 weeks. We were approaching week 5. The Concordat began to escalate their methods. They tried harder isolation, longer gaps between meals, brighter and dimmer lights at random intervals meant to disrupt any sense of rhythm. They played recorded sounds of what I assumed were meant to be distressing, low groaning noises, static, sudden loud bursts. None of it broke us. If anything, it gave us something to plan around. Deverick, it turned out, had spent 30 years on fishing boats reading weather patterns and ocean currents, which meant he had an incredible memory for cycles and timing. He started mapping the guard patrols in his head just from the sounds outside his cell. Footsteps, the hum of doors, distant voices. During our shared time together, he would draw rough diagrams in the dust on the floor with his finger, then wipe them away before guards returned. There's a gap, he said one day. tracing lines only the four of us could interpret. Every rotation, right here, there's about 4 minutes where this hallway isn't watched directly. 4 minutes to do what? Milo asked. I don't know yet, Deverick admitted. But it's information. Information is useful, even before you know how you'll use it. That stuck with me. Information is useful, even before you know how you'll use it. It became something like our motto, whispered between us during those short shared visits. A reminder that every small thing we noticed, every pattern, every mistake the guards made, was a tool we were quietly collecting. Around week 6, Thren tried something new. It separated Reyes from the rest of us completely, moving her to a different section of the ship, and told the remaining 3 of us that she had been sent away for processing failure, implying something bad had happened to her. Milo panicked. I felt my own chest tighten with fear. This was, I realized later, exactly the reaction they wanted, to use our bond against us, to make us believe that caring about each other only led to loss and helplessness. But Deverick, calm as ever, spoke quietly. Think about it, he said. They want us to fall apart from fear. That means fear works on us the way they hoped it would, so let's not give them that. But what if something happened to her? Milo asked, voice cracking. Then we will find out, Deverick said. And if it did, falling apart now helps no one, especially not her. It was hard advice to follow. I will not pretend it was easy. But we held on, and 3 days later, Reyes was returned to us, tired but unharmed. She had been kept alone in a different cell, questioned repeatedly about our group, about human history, about what made us different from every other species they had processed. They kept asking me why we weren't breaking. She told us later, quietly, during shared time. I told them the truth. I said humans have been surviving terrible things for our whole history. Wars, disasters, hard times, and every single time, the humans who survived best were the ones who held on to each other and kept telling their story. I told them that's not a weakness they can remove. It's built into us. I do not know if Thren understood what she meant, but something about our resistance was clearly troubling the Concordat, because after that, their tactics changed again. This time, they tried kindness, or their version of it. Guards brought better food, they allowed longer shared visits. They even let sunlight-simulating lamps into our rooms, something none of the other captive species apparently received. Thren visited more gently now, speaking in a softer tone, offering to answer questions about where we were, what would happen to us, even offering small comforts. This is the dangerous part, Reyes warned us quietly. This is when other species usually give in. Not from cruelty but from relief. They get tired of resisting, and kindness feels like a reward for giving up. She was right to warn us. I felt it myself. The temptation to relax, to trust Thren a little, to let my guard down after so many weeks of fear. It would have been so easy. But we had each other to catch us when we slipped. When I found myself thanking Thren a little too warmly for extra food one day, Deverick simply said, "Later. Remember why we're being fed better. It's not because they like us. It's because we're the first ones who haven't broken." That reminder was enough to steady me again. We decided, as a group, to give Thren and its guards something they wanted to see, the appearance of progress. We started acting slightly more cooperative, slightly more subdued, without actually giving up anything real. We answered questions carefully, giving true but useless information. We let our faces show tiredness, even when our minds were sharper than ever, quietly gathering details, memorizing routes, learning the rhythms of the ship. It was Milo, surprisingly, who suggested this. "If they think we're almost broken," he said, "they'll relax their guard around us. That's when we'll actually have room to do something." I remember being proud of him in that moment. The scared teenager from the first cell was becoming someone quietly brave. By week 8, we had learned a great deal. Deverick's mental map of guard patrols, Reyes's information about the ship's layout from her time separated, Milo's careful observations about which guards were less alert during certain hours, and my own contribution, small conversations with Thren where I asked seemingly harmless questions and listened carefully to the answers, learning about the ship's destination, its crew size, and something important, the location of the other captive species being held nearby. We started to form a plan, though plan is a generous word for what was really a collection of small opportunities we hoped to string together. We did not want to hurt anyone. We simply wanted to create enough confusion, enough of a distraction, to reach the other captives, and find a way toward the ship's smaller transport vessels, which Deverick had noticed were only lightly guarded during certain hours. The final piece came when Thren, growing frustrated with our lack of full submission after so many weeks, decided to try one last major step, A joint session, all four of us together with monitoring equipment, meant to observe how we behaved under direct pressure as a group, likely hoping our unity would finally crack under close inspection. This was, without meaning to, exactly the opportunity we needed. It would put us together, away from our separate cells, in a room closer to the section where the other captives were held, during a time we had already identified as a gap in patrol coverage. We agreed on simple signals. A cough meant wait. A specific word, morning, meant move. We rehearsed nothing physically, since we had no chance to practice, but we rehearsed the plan in our minds over and over during our last shared visit before the session. If this doesn't work, Reyes said quietly, we tried something. That matters too. It'll work, Milo said, with more confidence than I expected from him. We've been thinking 3 steps ahead of them for weeks. They don't even know it. Deverick simply nodded. Information is useful, he reminded us one more time, even before you know how you'll use it. Now we know how. The joint session happened in a wide room with monitoring devices attached to our arms and heads. Thren stood at the front, its flat face panel watching each of us closely. Today, it said, we will observe your responses to direct comparison. You will discuss your individual progress honestly in front of one another. It was, I realized, one final attempt to turn us against each other, to see if pride or fear would make one of us try to appear more broken than the others to gain favor, breaking our unity in the process. We had prepared for this too. We took turns speaking, calm and measured, giving vague but plausible answers about tiredness, about missing home, about resignation, careful never to sound completely defeated, careful never to give Thren the full victory it wanted, but convincing enough to keep it engaged and slightly less alert than usual. Partway through, a guard outside the room signaled something to Thren, some routine matter elsewhere on the ship. Thren stepped toward the door to answer, turning its back only for a moment. Deverick coughed. Once. We waited. A minute later, another guard arrived to relieve the one at the door, a brief overlap where attention shifted for exactly the gap in coverage Deverick had mapped. I said quietly, "Morning." What followed was not dramatic, not the kind of daring escape you might imagine from old adventure stories. It was quiet and careful. We slipped our restraints, which had been loosened slightly over the weeks as a reward for our supposed cooperation, small enough freedom that no guard thought much of it. We moved through the door during the guard changeover, calm and unhurried, the way people move when they belong somewhere, because sudden or frightened movement draws attention, while calm movement often does not. We reached the section holding the other captive species, the silent, hollow-eyed creatures we had seen since our first day. I remember my heart pounding as we approached, worried they might be too far gone to respond, worried the whole plan might fall apart here. Reyes crouched by the nearest cell wall, a creature with pale scales and large dark eyes staring blankly ahead. "Hey," she said gently, softly, the way she used to talk to Milo in our first hours together. "We're getting out. Do you want to come?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's eyes slowly focused, as if waking from a long sleep, and it made a small, uncertain sound. Deverick had found, during his time mapping patrols, that the cell locks in this older section of the ship were simpler than the ones holding us, an oversight from a section rarely checked because its occupants never tried to leave. He worked quickly and quietly, and one by one, cell doors opened. Not every creature responded right away. Some stayed still, too deeply changed by their conditioning to react. It broke my heart to see that, and we did not have time to help everyone. But every creature that could move, we guided gently toward the smaller transport vessels Deverick had identified. The final stretch was the hardest. We reached the hangar bay just as an alarm began somewhere deep in the ship, a low pulsing sound that meant our absence had finally been noticed. Guards moved through corridors ahead of us, and for a moment I thought everything would fall apart right there at the end. But Milo, of all of us, had an idea. He remembered a maintenance panel Deverick had mentioned days earlier, a route that bypassed the main hangar entrance entirely, used by ship workers rather than guards. We took it, moving through narrow service corridors, guiding the freed creatures who could still walk, until we reached a smaller transport vessel tucked away from the main hangar traffic. It was Reyes who got the vessel's systems working, drawing on knowledge she never fully explained to us, though I later learned she had worked with aircraft before whatever brought her into space. Deverick guided the confused, frightened creatures aboard, speaking to them in a calm, steady voice even though none of them understood his language, because tone can carry meaning even without words. I stood at the vessel's opening, looking back down the corridor we had come from, and for just a moment, I saw Thren. It stood at the far end of the hallway, guards rushing past it toward the alarm. But Thren itself stood still, watching us with its flat, flickering face. It did not chase us. It did not call out. It simply watched, and I wondered, even then, if it was trying to understand something it had never encountered before in all its years of breaking species after species. "You were wrong," I called out to it, my voice carrying down the corridor. "About us. About all of them too, probably. You just never gave anyone a reason to prove it." I do not know if it heard me over the alarm. I do not know if it understood, even if it did. But I have thought about that moment many times since, Thren standing perfectly still while everything around it moved in chaos, watching 4 humans and a handful of freed captives escape a system that had never once failed before. The transport vessel doors closed. Reyes guided us out of the hangar, into open space, and toward whatever came next. We were found, eventually, by a passing trade vessel from a species allied loosely with a coalition that opposed the Valkyrie Concordat's methods. They were surprised to find humans aboard a stolen transport, more surprised still when they realized we had also brought along several individuals from species long presumed lost to Concordat conditioning. It took time, care, and patience to help those we rescued. Some improved slowly, remembering fragments of who they used to be. Others may never fully recover from what was done to them, and that is a hard truth I still carry with me. We did what we could, but we could not undo everything. As for the 4 of us, we returned to whatever passed for normal life after something like that. Milo grew into someone far braver and steadier than the frightened teenager I first met in that glowing blue cell. Reyes eventually helped train others on how to recognize and resist conditioning tactics, sharing what we had learned the hard way. Deverick went quiet again, the way he had been before, though I think he carried a kind of peace with him after all of it, knowing his patient mapping of small patterns had saved more than just the 4 of us. And I still tell stories. I tell this one now, in fact, because I think it matters. Not because we were stronger than every other species the Concordat had broken. I do not believe that is true. I think, instead, it was because humans have a strange, stubborn habit of turning fear into narrative, and narrative into connection, and connection into something no isolation chamber or conditioning program can easily remove. I heard, much later, through channels I will not explain here, that a quiet warning began circulating among slaver networks across that region of space. A short note added to trade manifests and capture guidelines. Do not purchase humans. I like to imagine Thren was the one who wrote it.